Not everyone who hates you wants to hurt you. Some want you humiliated, some want you erased, and the most terrifying ones, they want it to look like you destroyed yourself. We've been trained to fear the loud ones, the ones who shout, who fight, who threaten. But real danger doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it brings you coffee, sometimes it just waits. Because hatred is easy to notice, but premeditated malice, that wears a mask of charm, politeness, even concern. Right now, someone in your life may be keeping score, not because you wronged them, but because your existence threatens their illusion of control. And by the time you sense it, it may already be too late. This video isn't about fear, it's about clarity. What you're about to hear are 5 subtle but deeply disturbing signs that someone around you doesn't just dislike you. They want you gone. These signs are drawn from real-world behavior, psychological patterns, and timeless Stoic insight. And most importantly, you'll learn how to protect yourself without losing your soul. So if you've ever had a gut feeling that someone close to you isn't what they seem, trust it. And stay with me until the end, because once you see these patterns, you can never unsee them. Before we begin, consider subscribing to Stoic Spirit for more insight that sharpens your mind and protects your peace. Now let's start with the first sign, and it's one most people ignore until it's far too late. Sign 1, the silent observer. You switched gyms. You started using a different entrance to your office. You even staggered your lunch breaks randomly, hoping to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. But still, somehow, they're there. Not always close enough to speak, just close enough to notice you. Again, at first you chalk it up to coincidence. Then you try to rationalize it, but deep down, a quiet part of you starts whispering, "This isn't random anymore." What is a silent observer? This isn't your typical enemy. They're not confrontational. They don't argue, threaten, or even criticize you. In fact, they often appear polite, quiet, maybe even shy. But make no mistake, this person is watching you. Not passively, deliberately. They study your movements like a pattern. They observe where you go, when you leave, who you talk to, and when you're most alone. They learn your schedule, not to admire it, but to anticipate it. What's most dangerous is that nothing about them screams danger. They're the harmless classmate who sits 2 seats behind you. The friendly coworker who's always in the break room right when you are. The neighbor who always seems to walk their dog when you take out your trash. They don't speak up. They don't ask. They just show up over and over and over again. Bookmark the cost of ignoring it. When someone enters your space repeatedly without cause, and you choose to look the other way, what you're really giving up is your sense of safety. And once that's gone, it's hard to get it back. Left unchecked, this kind of quiet surveillance can escalate. Your mental clarity fades. You become hyper-aware, exhausted, always scanning the room, always wondering if you're being watched. And that's the trick. They don't have to hurt you to destabilize you. They just have to linger long enough, close enough to make you question your own instincts. And when you finally do react, you'll be the one that looks paranoid. That's what they count on. The Stoics taught us not to panic when confronted with discomfort, but to analyze it with calm reason. He is wise who pays attention to what repeats, not only what surprises. Epictetus. In other words, patterns matter, especially subtle ones. To live well, Stoicism demands that we remain vigilant not just of others, but of ourselves. When your inner world feels disturbed by someone's presence, without logical reason, that disturbance is a form of data. Don't label it as parent. Observe it, process it, then act from stillness, not fear. So what do you do when you start to sense it, that eerie familiarity, that quiet presence that never seems to go away? The Stoics would tell you, don't panic, don't lash out, and above all, don't ignore it. What you do is simple. You become even more observant than the one observing you. Start by keeping your mind clear and your senses sharp. Notice the patterns, not obsessively, but mindfully. If someone continues to appear around you with no reason, start documenting those moments. Not to prove something to others, but to yourself. You need to see the pattern with your own eyes before you can trust your instinct with full confidence. Then, begin reducing your digital footprints. We live in a world where privacy isn't stolen, it's given away. Your check-ins, your habits, your little online rituals, that's all ammunition in the wrong hands. The Stoic doesn't overshare, not because they're afraid, but because they respect their own peace. So reclaim your privacy. Own your time and space. And if your life has become too predictable, break the rhythm. Switch up your schedule, change your route, move quietly. This isn't about fear. It's about becoming untrackable to those who have no right to follow. In a world addicted to routine, unpredictability becomes a kind of armor. You also don't need to explain your distance. You don't owe emotional access to anyone simply because they smile at you. The Stoics believed in measured trust, earned slowly, kept guarded. So don't let politeness be your downfall. If someone feels off, you don't need proof to start protecting your space. Intuition is a form of wisdom when filtered through calm logic. Most importantly, don't second-guess the unease. That voice inside you, it's not weakness, it's awareness. And awareness is survival. The Stoic doesn't live in fear. They live in discernment. Melissa had broken up with her ex almost 6 months ago. The relationship ended quietly. No fights, no drama, just the mutual realization that they'd grown apart. At first, she thought it was all behind her, until she started seeing him everywhere. At her gym, at her favorite coffee shop, once at the grocery store late on a Wednesday night. He never approached her, never said a word, just a distant nod, a brief glance, and then he'd disappear into the background. At first, Melissa told herself it was nothing. Maybe he just happened to go to the same places. Maybe he hadn't fully moved on. Don't be paranoid, she whispered to herself. You're overthinking. But the pattern continued. No matter where she went or when, he always seemed to be nearby. So she changed her routine. She switched gyms, used different entrances, stopped posting stories on social media. She even drove to a grocery store across town. But 2 weeks later, there he was. Same aisle, same distant glance. It wasn't random anymore. That's when Melissa stopped making excuses. She began writing down every encounter, time, place, what she was doing. Over the next month, she collected a list of locations that no one else could have predicted, unless they had been actively tracking her. She started carrying a small discreet camera, installed motion sensors near her apartment, alerted her inner circle. Most importantly, she stopped being polite. She no longer smiled back, no longer brushed off the coincidences. Her boundaries became firm. Her awareness became weaponized. And slowly, he disappeared. No confrontation, no closure. But he knew she was no longer easy to follow. And that was enough. Melissa didn't need to fight. She just needed to stop explaining away the very instincts that were trying to protect her. That is what Stoic courage looks like in the real world. When you move with awareness, those who wish to exploit your habits lose their grip. And when you protect your peace, you reclaim your power quietly, deliberately, like a true Stoic. Sign 2. The Saboteur Strategy. Time reveals all masks. Character, not rumor, survives. Marcus Aurelius. There's a kind of enemy that doesn't yell, doesn't confront, and never comes at you directly. They won't call you out in front of others. They won't post about you online. They won't even look angry. Instead, they whisper. They plant seeds. They sit quietly in the background, pulling strings that unravel your reputation, slowly, deliberately, and without leaving fingerprints. This is the saboteur strategy. Bookmark Cam 85. What is the saboteur strategy? The saboteur doesn't want to fight. They want something more effective, your isolation. Instead of striking once, they choose erosion over time. They drop comments like, "He's been acting kind of off lately, hasn't he? I don't want to assume anything, but I think she's hiding something." They never accuse. That would be too obvious. They imply. They nudge. They know how to look concerned while crafting doubt. And it works, because people tend to believe what they hear first, even if the facts don't follow. They target your workplace, your closest friendships, your inner circle. And the worst part? Every piece of sabotage feels disconnected, like random misfortune, so you don't suspect a coordinated attack. You just think, you're falling apart. Why it's so dangerous? The saboteur's weapon isn't a knife, it's a whisper. And they know how to use it better than most people use their voice. You don't realize you're being targeted until your name starts to sound different when others say it. until invitations stop arriving, until your boss skips you for that project, until your best friend says, "I just feel like you've changed." This strategy is slow, surgical, and devastating. And here's the terrifying part. You might even start to believe them. You start wondering, did I mess up? Did I do something wrong? Your own mind begins echoing the very doubts they placed in others. That's when the saboteur wins, when you begin to self-destruct without them lifting another finger. Marcus Aurelius warned that rumors are like wind, loud but never lasting, unless you chase them. A Stoic doesn't react to every accusation. They don't go running from person to person trying to clean up lies. They anchor themselves in truth, character, and calm endurance. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. But he also wrote, "The impediment to action advances action," which means even when someone tries to block your path, that obstruction becomes your test, your way forward. In other words, the sabotage isn't the end. It's your signal to step into clarity. Bookmark how to neutralize the saboteur. First, resist the urge to defend yourself at every turn. The saboteur thrives on your panic. If you run around trying to explain yourself to everyone, it only makes you look unstable, exactly what they're suggesting behind your back. So instead, go quiet, go focused. Start keeping track of conversations, dates, and moments that feel off. Write them down. Trust isn't built in a day, but neither is sabotage. And when you track patterns over time, the picture becomes clearer. Second, don't play their game, play your own. Keep showing up as who you truly are. Let your actions outlive their insinuations. At work, stay consistent, deliver results, be professional. In relationships, be direct, honest, and open. Character reveals itself over time, so does deceit. And when possible, reclaim your inner circle through direct conversations. Speak not to clear your name, but to reconnect in truth. Sometimes all it takes is one honest conversation to expose a dozen lies. Finally, remind yourself, silence can be power. Not all storms are meant to be shouted through. Olivia worked in a competitive agency. She was respected, liked by clients, and had just been considered for a promotion. And then, everything started to shift. Her team became distant. Her supervisor started questioning her tone in meetings. A friend at work canceled lunch 3 times in a row. She couldn't put her finger on it, until someone let it slip that her colleague Nina had been saying she was burned out, emotional, not reliable lately. At first, Olivia was furious. Then, she paused. Instead of retaliating, she started documenting. Every meeting, every shift in tone, every project she completed successfully. She stayed focused, consistent, and precise. Then she had one quiet, intentional conversation with her boss. Not to vent, but to share her observations and commitment. Calm, clear, stoic. Soon the pattern Nina had created collapsed. The story no longer held up. Why? Because Olivia never lost herself in the chaos. She let her integrity do the talking. And in the end, it wasn't Nina who got the promotion. It was Olivia, because she chose clarity over noise, purpose over panic. You don't need to chase every shadow to defeat the saboteur. You just need to stand still long enough to let the truth rise. And when you do, they disappear into their own fog. Sign 3. The false friend facade. A friend is someone you trust with your soul, but that trust must be earned, not handed to anyone who smiles and listens. Seneca. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who oppose you. They're the ones who pretend to understand you. They don't show up to argue. They show up to get close, too fast. This kind of person doesn't force their way into your life with conflict. They ease in with compliments, attention, and emotional connection. They mirror your values, your wounds, your dreams. They just happen to like everything you like. They relate to your deepest struggles. And it feels good at first. You finally feel seen, heard, understood. But what's really happening is something far more calculated. They aren't building a friendship. They're building access. They want your calendar, your family dynamics, your insecurities, your trauma history. Not to help, not to hold space for you, but to map out your emotional blueprint so they can control or harm you later. This isn't connection, it's reconnaissance. The false friend's power comes from how disarming they are. They come in under the radar, at a time when you're open, or worse, when you're vulnerable. They rush intimacy. They drop personal stories, share past pain, say things like, "I've never told anyone this before." And in return, they want you to open up too. The more you share, the more they file away. And if you don't notice it in time, here's what can happen. You may give them full access to the softest parts of your life before they've earned it. They become part of your family's life, your workspace, your schedule. They might help you move, offer to run errands, buy your groceries. They'll seem incredibly supportive until you set a boundary or say no. Then suddenly, that warmth turns cold. And because they know your wounds, they know exactly where to strike. They won't attack you directly. They'll twist your words to others. Use your pain against you. They might imply you're unstable or passive-aggressively mention your past mistakes to mutual friends. And because they came in looking like a savior, you won't realize they're the saboteur until it's already cost you something. Your reputation, your safety, your sense of self. Worse, it can make you mistrust real connections later. Because once you've been betrayed by someone who just wanted to help, it's harder to let the right people in. Stoicism doesn't tell us to isolate ourselves or assume everyone is a threat. It tells us to be slow in handing out deep trust, especially when that trust hasn't been earned through time and consistency. Don't mistake familiarity for friendship, Seneca warned. Observe the pace. True friendship grows slowly and only when watered with virtue. So when someone rushes in with intensity, flooding your life with attention, promises, and sympathy, pause. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. How to see through the facade and protect yourself. Start by slowing down the pace of intimacy. You don't owe your life story to someone just because they shared theirs. Ask yourself, why is this person trying to get this close, this fast? Healthy connection respects space. It breathes. Predatory closeness pressurizes you into sharing, committing, trusting. Too soon. Next, observe behavior, not just emotion. What do they do when you say no? Do they respect your limits or guilt trip you? Do they honor your privacy or find subtle ways to push past it? Pay attention to how they interact with your other relationships. Are they trying to isolate you under the guise of being your only real friend? Do they discourage your existing friendships, criticize people you love, and most importantly, keep emotional gates guarded until someone proves they know how to treat what's behind them? That's not being distant. That's being discerning. Mason met Ryan at a local entrepreneur networking event. At first, it was great. Ryan was funny, insightful, and seemed genuinely interested in Mason's work and life. Within 2 weeks, they were texting daily. Ryan asked deep questions, offered to help redesign Mason's website, wanted to meet his family. Mason felt flattered, seen, supported, so he let Ryan in. But soon after, Mason noticed something strange. Ryan began asking about Mason's investors, his past mistakes. He mentioned things in front of others that Mason had shared in confidence, and when Mason pulled back a little, Ryan grew cold, passive-aggressive, dismissive. That's when Mason remembered a principle he once read from Epictetus. No man is truly your friend until he has stood beside you in restraint. So Mason slowed everything down. He stopped oversharing. He politely declined help. He created distance and watched. Sure enough, without access, Ryan lost interest. The friendship faded, but so did the pressure. Mason didn't lose anything, because this time he had been alert, not alarmed. You don't have to be suspicious of everyone, but when a person rushes into closeness without history, without testing, stop romanticizing the bond. Start observing the intention. Because a true friend won't just want your story. They'll protect it. And a false one? They'll memorize every word, then use it when it suits them. Sign 4. The emotional blackmailer. You stop answering right away. They grow cold. You cancel plans. They say, "Guess I'm not important anymore." You speak your truth. They act like you broke something sacred. At first, it feels like guilt. Then, it starts to feel like prison. Emotional blackmail doesn't look like manipulation at first. It looks like closeness, like vulnerability, like love. But slowly, it turns your empathy into a leash. You begin making choices not because they feel right, but because you're afraid of disappointing them. You say yes when you're exhausted. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You give in, not because you agree, but because you don't want the fallout. And every time you cave, the pattern tightens. At first, it's just one compromise. Then it becomes routine. Before long, you forget what your own boundaries even were. Emotional blackmail rewires your internal compass. You start confusing guilt for goodness. You start measuring your worth by how well you keep someone else emotionally stable. But here's the truth. You are not responsible for someone else's reaction to your honesty. Their discomfort does not equal your failure. What emotional blackmail looks like. It's subtle at first. It sounds like, if you really cared, you'd do this for me. Only you can make me feel better. I guess I just expected more from you. They don't scream. They don't demand. They softly nudge you into a guilt trap. One request, one sigh, one silence at a time. And if you say no, they withdraw. They guilt trip. They get just upset enough to make you doubt yourself. Emotional blackmailers know that guilt is more powerful than anger. They don't need to yell to get control. They just need to make you feel like you've hurt them, even when you've done nothing wrong. Emma had been close friends with Jade since college. They'd been through heartbreaks, job changes, family issues, everything. But over time, Emma started noticing a pattern. Whenever she was busy or needed space, Jade would go quiet, passive-aggressive, hurt, distant. If Emma didn't respond fast enough, Jade would send messages like, "I guess you're too important for me now. Wow, didn't expect you to be that kind of person." And every time, Emma felt awful. So she canceled her own plans, answered late-night calls, bent over backwards, just to keep Jade from feeling abandoned. Until one day, Emma realized she wasn't showing up for Jade anymore. She was showing up for fear. The Stoics made it clear. Compassion is a virtue, but codependency is not. No man is free who is not master of himself. Epictetus. Being kind doesn't mean being controlled. Stoicism teaches us to act from reason, not emotional coercion. To give freely, not under pressure. To help without compromising the core of who we are. When someone demands loyalty through guilt, they're not building connection. They're building a form of quiet domination. Stoic strategies to disarm emotional blackmail. Start by clarifying your boundaries internally before you try to enforce them externally. What are you truly responsible for? What emotions belong to them, not you? Write it down if you have to. Define it clearly. You cannot draw a line if you don't know where it stands. Second, practice saying no without justification. You don't need to explain every decision. A firm, respectful no is a full sentence, and a sacred one. When you give in to guilt once, you teach them that discomfort is your weakness. But when you stay calm and consistent, you teach them your peace is not up for negotiation. Third, become aware of your patterns. If you're constantly doing things out of guilt, pause. Ask yourself, would I still do this if I didn't feel responsible for their emotions? If the answer is no, step back. You're being manipulated, not loved. Finally, stop rewarding guilt tactics with extra attention. That doesn't mean abandoning people in need. It means refusing to play the game. Care deeply, but act wisely. Back to Emma and her turning point. One evening, Jade messaged Emma again after Emma didn't reply for a few hours. Some friend you turned out to be. But this time, Emma paused. She didn't rush to explain. She didn't apologize out of reflex. She took a breath. She opened her journal and wrote, "I'm not responsible for her insecurity. I showed up with honesty. That's enough." Then she replied calmly, "I care about you, but I won't be guilted into feeling wrong for needing space. Let's talk when we can both speak with respect." Jade didn't respond right away. But something shifted. The control cracked. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt free. Because the moment you stop letting guilt lead, you start walking toward clarity. And that is where real strength begins. Sign 5. The compliment trap. You really surprised me with how well you handled that. Sounds nice, right? But let it sink in. Why is your competence a surprise? That wasn't a compliment. That was a message, delivered with a smile. What the compliment trap looks like. Not all manipulation comes in criticism. Sometimes it comes wrapped in flattery. The compliment trap is subtle. It doesn't shout. It charms. It shows up in moments where you're vulnerable or looking for approval, and it gives you just enough praise to hook your attention, while sliding in an undertone that leaves you unsure. You hear things like, "I didn't think you had it in you. Wow, you actually pulled it off. You're smarter than you look. "You're better at this than I expected. Good for you." They smile. You smile back. But something inside you tenses. Because it didn't feel clean. It felt calculated. That's because it was. This tactic is used by people who don't want to confront you directly, but still want control. Instead of attacking your character, they limit your identity subtly, one backhanded compliment at a time. Marcus Aurelius warned, if praise lifts you and criticism crushes you, you are already a slave to others. A Stoic doesn't chase validation. They don't let praise inflate them, and they don't let insult break them, because either one, if unchecked, can pull you off course. Stoicism teaches us to build identity from within, rooted in virtue, not opinion. To see compliments for what they are, data, not direction. The compliment trap can feel harmless, but over time, it causes real damage. It trains you to seek approval from the wrong people, especially those who know how to withhold and deliver validation like breadcrumbs. It makes you perform, not for excellence, but for acceptance. Worse, it starts to reframe your own identity. You begin to internalize their version of you. I'm only impressive for someone like me. I guess I'm good, but not great. It shrinks your self-perception while dressing it up as encouragement. And that's the genius of it. You feel grateful for being diminished. In relationships, this can make you dependent. You start craving the approval of the person who's gently undermining you, hoping that next time they'll give you pure praise. But they never do. Because the moment you're hooked, they've already won. Stoic strategies to break the compliment trap. The first move is emotional separation. Learn to accept a compliment without absorbing it as truth. You can say thank you without letting it anchor your self-worth. Test it. Ask yourself, if no one had said this, would I still believe it about myself? If the answer is yes, then you're free. If the answer is no, it's time to reevaluate what you've been outsourcing. Next, become aware of the tone, not just the words. Backhanded compliments feel different in your gut. They land with friction, not warmth. Don't ignore that. That tension is your clarity waking up. Also, watch how you feel after someone praises you. Do you feel encouraged or vaguely embarrassed? Empowered or belittled? That distinction matters more than the words themselves. Then practice not reacting at all. Don't overthink. Don't explain yourself. Let the compliment sit in the space. Let them watch you remain unfazed. That silence, that groundedness, that's Stoic power. Lastly, build a mental file of your values and results. Not just for ego, but to remind yourself who you are without applause. So the next time someone says, "You did better than I thought," you'll smile, because you already knew. Maya was in her first year at a new firm. She worked hard, delivered results, stayed late, played by the rules. Her supervisor, Greg, would often say, "You're surprisingly sharp for someone so young. Didn't expect you to keep up with the team, but well done." At first, she took it as praise. She smiled. She thanked him. She worked harder. But after months of hearing the same tone, "You're good for someone like you," she started to doubt herself. Was she only valuable because she defied his expectations? Was she performing for excellence or just his approval? Then one evening, while reviewing her performance metrics, she paused. She had exceeded targets, closed major clients, supported 3 departments, and she remembered a quote she once saved from Marcus Aurelius: "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." That night, she rewrote the narrative. She stopped overthinking. She stopped reacting to every compliment with eagerness. She let her work stand, quiet, firm, and real. And when Greg next said, "Wow, didn't expect you to handle that client so well," she smiled calmly and said, "You'll get used to it." Because when your worth is no longer measured by their surprise, you've already left their trap behind. And that, truly, is the most powerful compliment of all, the one you don't need to hear. Sign 6. The story spinner. You share a moment in good faith, and somehow you end up misquoted in someone else's narrative. You opened a window, they turned it into a stage, and now you're not even sure what version of you is out there anymore. There's a very specific kind of betrayal that doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't come with confrontation or insult. It comes through a smile and a retelling. The story spinner is someone who uses your words with just enough twist to change how people see you. They don't lie outright. That would be easy to catch. They distort, They reframe. They take what you said, remove the context, color in some shadows, and offer it up as a cautionary tale, or worse, entertainment. And you don't realize the damage until it's already moving through rooms you've never walked into. Because the most dangerous thing isn't someone who attacks your name. It's someone who rewrites your story and makes others believe it was theirs to tell. The story spinner usually doesn't appear hostile. In fact, they often seem like the one who listens. They nod, they ask questions, they lean in, but they don't do this to understand. They do it to collect. Later, when you're not around, they tell the story again. Only now, it sounds a little different, more dramatic, more damning. And somehow, you're just a little smaller than you were the first time. The words may be yours, but the intention? It's theirs. They may preface it with, "I don't mean to gossip, but," or, "Don't tell anyone I told you this, but it was kind of weird when she said," and in that moment, your character becomes a topic, not a truth. What's worse, the people hearing the story don't realize it's been altered. They think they're learning something about you. What they're actually learning is how little the spinner values the difference between truth and narrative. Speak only when your words will not become weapons in other hands. Seneca. The Stoics taught restraint, not to protect others from us, but to protect ourselves from those who misuse intimacy. When you speak freely to someone who doesn't honor the context of what you've said, you don't just risk being misunderstood, you risk being reshaped. And once that version of you enters a room without you, you don't get to defend it. Because in the mind of someone who's already heard your story, you've already been judged. Stoicism reminds us, the truth doesn't need to travel fast, it needs to stand firm. So don't chase down every rumor. Build a life so solid, even false stories fall apart on their own. Stoic strategies to diffuse the story spinner. The first step is discernment through silence. Watch who leans in too much, too fast, who collects more than they share. People who gather stories without ever offering their own are not interested in connection. They're interested in material. If someone rarely shows vulnerability, but always wants yours, pause. Second, treat information like currency. Don't spend it where it won't be respected. Your memories, mistakes, and confessions are not content. They are sacred. If someone treats them like social capital, take your distance seriously. Third, pay attention to how someone talks about others in front of you. If they consistently twist stories, shift tones, or laugh at someone else's expense, know this: you're not the exception. You're just not in the spotlight yet. One day, they'll tell your story too, and you won't recognize it. Next, if you do discover that something you shared has been retold inaccurately, don't rush to defend yourself. That's exactly the reaction a spinner counts on: flustered, emotional, vulnerable again. Instead, move with calm clarity. Address it if needed, but not for vengeance, for truth. And if possible, let your consistency and quiet strength be your correction. You don't need to scream the truth in every room. You just need to live it loud enough that the lie can't stand next to it. Finally, remember that not every wound requires revenge. Sometimes the most stoic response is to outlast the fiction by simply refusing to become part of the performance. Sign 7. Escalating aggression. A punch that begins as a joke is still a punch. Stoic realism. Not all threats enter your life shouting. Some whisper, some laugh, some call it just a joke. But behind the humor, there's a test. And behind that test, there's intent. Escalating aggression doesn't come at you like a sudden storm. It creeps in slowly. One offhand comment, one too close encounter, one little accident at a time. It begins with jokes that make your stomach tighten. You're lucky I'm not a psychopath. If I ever snapped, no one would ever know. I could kill someone and get away with it. Laughter follows, maybe from others, maybe from them, but not from you. They brush past your boundaries with smiles. They stand too close in elevators. They touch your arm just a little too long or block your path while acting casual. And when you flinch, they say, "Relax. Don't be so sensitive." That's not kindness. That's conditioning. Each small violation is a test. How much will you tolerate before you say something? And the longer you wait, the higher the cost. The Stoics didn't turn away from uncomfortable realities. They trained for them. He who is forewarned is forearmed. Seneca Stoicism isn't about pretending danger doesn't exist. It's about seeing clearly, without panic, so you can act with principle and courage. Escalating aggression thrives on confusion. It wears masks. But Stoic clarity sees through all masks because it refuses to ignore repeated disruptions to peace. If someone is testing your limits, even in playful tones, they are not harmless, and you are not overreacting. What makes escalating aggression so dangerous isn't how loud it gets, it's how quietly it begins. It works because it slips beneath your radar, because it counts on something very human, your discomfort with confrontation. So you start second-guessing yourself. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm just being sensitive. They didn't really do anything. I'll just laugh it off. And while you're busy talking yourself down, they're busy turning the volume up. They move a little closer. Their jokes get a little darker. Their moods shift unpredictably, just enough to keep you uneasy, but not enough to justify calling it out. Over time, something subtle happens. You start to ignore your own instincts. What once felt off now feels familiar. What once made you uncomfortable now feels like normal. And by the time they reveal who they really are, you've already been conditioned to stay silent. If things escalate, emotionally, physically, or psychologically, you might find yourself with no support. Because to everyone else, they still seem harmless. And the cruelest part, you might believe that too. Bookmark: Stoic strategies to respond with strength. First, listen to what your discomfort is telling you. Your body has its own wisdom. When someone's words or actions consistently trigger anxiety, that's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. Don't dismiss that quiet warning bell. Honor it. Second, do not normalize jokes that contain threats or disturbing imagery. Humor is often the easiest place to hide cruelty. If someone repeatedly makes you the subject of violent or degrading humor, that's not funny. That's manipulative. Set the boundary. That makes me uncomfortable. Don't say that again. You don't need to explain. You don't need to laugh it off. Let your tone speak for you. Calm, steady, non-negotiable. Third, document the pattern if it continues. Start writing down what happened, when, and where. Not to become obsessed, but to have clarity. If things escalate, you'll have a record, and your memory won't be questioned. Fourth, enforce physical and emotional space. If someone repeatedly invades your personal space, step back. Literally and relationally. You don't need to justify that distance. Safety is not something you owe anyone an explanation for. Finally, if the behavior becomes threatening, act swiftly and assertively. Speak with a supervisor, report the incident, or seek outside help. It doesn't matter if others say nothing happened. You are not obligated to wait until something happens to act. The Stoic doesn't wait for the fire to start before checking where the exits are. You remember the coworker who always made those dark jokes? Who said he'd make the perfect killer because he knew how to cover his tracks? The one who always stood a little too close, hovered around when you worked late, and once left an odd object on your desk with no explanation? You laughed it off at first. So did everyone else. But it didn't stop. In fact, it got darker. Then you remembered. Boundaries unspoken are boundaries erased. So you began to act. You stopped entertaining the jokes. You wrote down the interactions. You told your manager. You moved your desk. You stopped apologizing for feeling unsafe. And little by little, the power they held over your silence disappeared. Because people like that don't expect resistance. They expect submission. But you remembered something more powerful than fear. You are allowed to act before things go too far. You don't have to wait for the aggression to get louder. You can act when it's still a whisper. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's stoicism in motion. Sign 8, the shadow mimic. You start wearing a new style. So do they. You share a quote that means something to you, and the next day they post the same words. You shift your tone, find your voice, evolve, and somehow they evolve too. At first it feels flattering, until it doesn't. Until it feels like someone isn't just inspired by you. They're trying to be you. There's a difference between learning from someone and copying their identity. The shadow mimic doesn't admire from a distance. They replicate from within. They mimic your way of speaking, your online presence, your thought patterns. They mirror your mannerisms, repeat your words, follow your friends, and enter your spaces. And what's worse, they do it so quietly, so gradually, that no one notices. Not even you, until it's already started to feel like you're being replaced. You've spent years shaping your sense of self, and suddenly, someone else is presenting a version of that same self to the world. Same message, same voice. Only it's not theirs. It's yours, borrowed, blurred, and being used without permission. And then it starts to shift the ground beneath your feet, because people begin to mix the two of you up. Your ideas don't feel like yours anymore. Your originality becomes a shared performance. They speak with your language, but somehow receive the spotlight you helped create. And slowly, you begin to shrink back, not because you've changed, but because your presence has been mirrored into exhaustion. This kind of mimicry isn't just annoying, it's disorienting, because it challenges the one thing Stoics hold sacred: clarity of self. Marcus Aurelius said that a wise person is original not because they try to stand out, but because they are rooted in their values, their reason, their virtue. And when someone imitates you without understanding the substance behind your actions, they may succeed in copying your appearance, but they will never match your depth. Still, the danger remains, because the shadow mimic doesn't just dilute your image, they can also damage your credibility. When they start echoing your voice in rooms you haven't entered, you lose control over your own narrative. They may leverage your reputation for personal gain. They may network through your connections, pitch ideas similar to yours, even present your phrasing as their own. And when distance inevitably forms, when things fall apart, they stay. But you walk away feeling like you've been written out of a story you created. So what do you do when someone is slowly becoming your shadow? The first step is simple, but difficult. You stop pretending it's not happening. You name it, not out of drama, but out of discernment. Then you pull back. You stop oversharing your process. You reserve your insights, not out of fear, but to protect the sacredness of creation. Some things are meant to be seen only when they're ready, not when someone else is eager to steal them. You shift your focus back to where imitation can't follow: depth. The shadow mimic can copy your moves, but they can't mimic your growth. They can imitate your words, but they'll never have your why. And when you no longer feed the illusion, something happens. They struggle to keep up, because a copy, no matter how convincing, needs constant reference. But you've already moved forward. Don't confront them. Don't explain. Just step away. Let time reveal the gap between imitation and embodiment. And as you continue walking your own path, your consistency will speak louder than anything they try to echo. Because the world always remembers who arrived with authenticity, not who arrived second, louder. You began noticing it the day they posted a caption that sounded too familiar. You brushed it off, until the phrases kept coming. The tone, the colors, the timing, it all started to blur, not just for others, but for you. But instead of reacting, you chose something else. You retreated into refinement. You stopped narrating every idea out loud. You stopped showing every corner of your evolution. And while they kept chasing your reflection, you found something far more powerful than being original. You found your center. Because in the end, they can mimic your voice. They can steal your rhythm, but they cannot replicate the stillness you've earned. And when you stop offering light, the shadow fades all by itself. Sign 9, the chaos conductor. They don't shout, they don't rage, they don't start fires in plain sight. But somehow, every time there's a conflict, they're in the middle of it. Calm, collected, and perfectly positioned between both sides. You never see them throw the match. You only see them holding the bucket of water. The chaos conductor thrives on emotional confusion. They plant quiet seeds of misunderstanding between people, then step in to explain what was really said. They mix half-truths with their own version of events, just enough to make someone question your intentions and trust theirs. They control the narrative not by shouting over you, but by delivering just enough distortion to make everyone pause before they believe you. It often starts with something subtle: a sentence, a whisper, a casual remark made in passing. "Oh, I didn't mean to cause drama. I just thought you should know what they said." Or, "I assumed you'd already told her how you felt. That's why I brought it up." And now, you're caught in the fallout of a conversation you never agreed to have, trying to explain, to clarify, to defend. But the damage is already done. They don't create storms. They create clouds, just enough to block the light. And that's where the danger lies. because no one sees it coming. Not your friends. Not your team. Sometimes not even you. You start noticing people pulling away. You feel tension in rooms that used to be warm. You sense doubt in someone's voice when they mention a situation you thought was resolved. And when you trace it back, you realize the common link in every misunderstanding was them. But they always appear as the neutral party, the peacemaker, the one who just wants to help. In reality, they've been quietly rearranging the social structure, positioning themselves at the center of trust by breaking connections between everyone else. The real cost? You lose credibility without ever knowing what you supposedly said. You lose friendships without ever being given a chance to clarify. And the worst part is, you begin to question your own memory, your own words, your own intent. When confusion becomes the norm, clarity feels like a luxury you can no longer afford. The Stoics had little tolerance for this kind of manipulation. Epictetus warned, avoid those who use confusion to gain clarity for themselves. Because when someone leverages distortion to rise in status, they are not seeking truth. They are weaponizing trust. A Stoic doesn't feed chaos by participating in it. They don't defend themselves against rumors. They build lives that make lies irrelevant. But first, they see through the fog. So how do you respond when you realize someone is quietly conducting conflict from the shadows? First, stop trusting secondhand conversations. If someone says, they told me this about you, don't defend, verify. Go straight to the source. Ask questions. Reopen clarity. Chaos thrives in triangulation. Break the triangle. Second, stop using them as a bridge. Even if they seem like the easiest way to fix things between others, don't let them be the messenger. People who manage drama often created it. Instead, use direct communication, even if it feels awkward at first. A short conversation in truth is worth more than hours of confusion through a middleman. Third, notice who always seems to be in the center of tension, but never seems affected by it. They're calm, not because they're wise, but because they're in control. When someone repeatedly stirs the pot and then sits back like the one saving the meal, you are not witnessing diplomacy, you are witnessing orchestration. Fourth, remove yourself from the cycle of defense. If you find yourself constantly explaining, clarifying, clearing things up, step away. Let people believe what they want. The Stoic knows that reputation is earned over time, not rescued in a moment. And finally, if needed, cut them out completely. Not as revenge, but as release. You don't need to accuse. You just need to stop playing the role they've assigned you in their drama. Now think back to that moment. They said, I just thought you didn't like her anymore. That's why I mentioned it. And suddenly, you're caught in a misunderstanding with someone you deeply valued. But this time, instead of scrambling to explain, you did something different. You went directly to the person involved. You calmly asked, what exactly did you hear? And when the distortion revealed itself, you didn't chase anger. You simply saw the pattern and stepped away from it. You started having conversations face to face. You stopped looping through third-party feedback. You built your connections in truth, not hearsay. And over time, the chaos conductor, they lost their power. Because without access to confusion, they had nothing left to conduct. Sign 10, the patient predator. They don't rush, they don't provoke, they don't chase, they wait. They study you, not with obsession, but with calculation. They learn your patterns, your weaknesses, your emotional language, and they build a version of themselves that fits seamlessly into your life. At first, it feels safe. They're supportive, attentive, thoughtful. They never overstep, never demand, never push. They simply remain. Patient, present, predictable. But underneath that calm surface is something colder. A long game. Because the patient predator doesn't want revenge. They want advantage. And they're willing to wait as long as it takes for the perfect opportunity to strike. It might look like kindness. They remember your birthday better than your family. They offer to help when no one else notices. They give you space when you need it, then appear just in time with the right words. You tell yourself, this person really sees me. They've never asked for anything in return. They're the most stable person in my life. But that's the strategy. The goal isn't connection, it's access. Undetected, unquestioned, unchallenged. Until one day when you're most vulnerable, when you've let your guard all the way down, they make their move. A betrayal, a withdrawal, a reveal, and it cuts deeper than anything you faced, because it wasn't just manipulation, it was a performance. Staged from the beginning. What makes this kind of predator so dangerous is the timing. They wait until you're isolated. They wait until you're emotionally dependent. They wait until you've stopped questioning their intentions. And then, with surgical precision, they take what they want, your trust, your resources, your reputation, and vanish. You're left stunned, not because the damage was loud, but because it was silent for so long. You doubt yourself. How could I not have seen this coming? Was it all fake? Am I just naive? And the truth is, you aren't naive. You were normal. You were human. You trusted someone who mastered the art of earning trust without ever deserving it. The Stoics warned against this kind of blindness. They taught us to live with open eyes, even in moments of peace. Epictetus might have called this philosophical preparedness, a way of staying grounded even when things seem perfect. Because, as he once said, don't judge people by how they make you feel when you're useful. Judge them by how they act when they no longer benefit from you. The Stoic does not fear betrayal, but they train for it. Not by living in paranoia, but by cultivating discernment. So what can you do when you suspect someone is playing the long game? First, trust behavior, not comfort. When someone makes you feel safe, ask yourself, what have they actually done when I had nothing to offer? Loyalty is not proven during your highs. It's revealed in your lows. Second, observe the timing of their support. Do they show up when others aren't around? Are they only present when it benefits their image or deepens your dependence? Do they offer help you didn't ask for, then disappear when you truly need it? Third, set internal boundaries. You can appreciate someone's support without giving them unrestricted access to your emotions, your routines, or your private decisions. Keep something sacred. Not out of secrecy, but out of sovereignty. Fourth, delay deep trust. Time is your greatest ally. Let people prove their intentions not through grand gestures, but through consistency across seasons. Anyone can seem perfect for a few months, but a predator won't endure what a friend will. Inconvenience, distance, delay, disagreement. And finally, learn to pause when something feels too right, not with suspicion, with curiosity. Ask, is this comfort earned or engineered? Because sometimes, the most polished people are not who they appear to be, and the most dangerous masks are the ones born with patience. This next example isn't fiction. It's a true story, one that was so disturbing it became a best-selling memoir and later a Netflix series called Inventing Anna. Rachel Deloach Williams thought she had found a rare kind of friend. Anna Sorokin, who introduced herself as Anna Delvey, came off as refined, generous, self-sufficient. A young heiress from Germany who always picked up the check, who never asked for anything, and who made others feel like they were part of something elite and extraordinary. Anna wasn't loud, she wasn't erratic, she didn't push or pull. She simply stayed close, helpful, composed, observant. And over time, Rachel came to trust her completely. There were no warning signs, no betrayals, until everything collapsed in silence. It all unraveled on a luxury trip to Morocco. Anna invited Rachel, promising to cover the cost. But once there, her credit cards mysteriously failed, and she asked Rachel to front the expenses, assuring her she'd pay her back. Rachel did. And just like that, she was left with over $62,000 in personal debt, abandoned by the very person she believed was her most reliable friend. Anna didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She just disappeared when Rachel needed her most. And the weight of that betrayal wasn't just financial. It was existential. Because when someone gains your trust with precision, with patience, with perfect timing, the moment they break it, you're not just hurt, you're shattered. What Rachel learned, and what so many others never realize in time, is that true danger doesn't always wear a mask of menace. Sometimes it wears a smile, perfect timing, and a calm voice. And that's what makes the patient predator so lethal. They earn your loyalty slowly. They ask for nothing until they know you'll give them everything. Remember that the greatest dangers rarely announce themselves with hostility. They smile warmly, speak softly, and wait patiently in the shadows. Throughout this video, we've unmasked 10 subtle but dangerous signs of hidden malice, giving you powerful tools from Stoicism to protect your peace and clarity. By becoming more vigilant and discerning, you now have the insight to navigate relationships safely, confidently, and wisely. When you apply these Stoic principles, you're not just defending yourself, you're transforming the way you engage with the world. You gain strength from within, resilience that shields you from manipulation, clarity that illuminates your decisions, and wisdom that guides your interactions. Now I challenge you. Choose just one of these principles and consciously practice it this week. Notice how your interactions change and how your sense of self strengthens. Leave a comment below sharing your favorite lesson from today's video, or if you're unsure, simply write, "I like this video." Your thoughts help us improve and inspire others as well. And remember, awareness is your greatest weapon. Stay mindful, stay empowered, and trust your intuition. It's often your truest guide. If this video helped you see things more clearly, subscribe, not for us, but for the stronger version of you that's waiting to rise. Stay sharp, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.